Welcome. My name is Margaret Shield. I'm the coalition organizer for the Washington Breeze Coalition. I use she, her pronouns, and we're glad you're here at the Skills and Tips for Understanding the Washington State Legislative Session. This session is a training on how to follow and understand developments during the Washington State Legislative Session. And we'll start out just by looking at what are some of the key resources that are going to be really valuable to you as you try to look at what's going on in Olympia. First one is the Washington State Legislature's website, ledge.wa.gov is how I pronounce it. And I'll flip over to that website in just a minute, but this is where you find information about legislators, bills, hearings. It also has amazing educational resources. If you have time to poke around, over the years, they've been developing a variety of ways that you can better understand the sometimes hard to understand processes the legislature goes through. And I will also show you when we flip over to that website that it has totally been redesigned. So right now there are two tabs to look under that have those educational resources. One is the easiest to find. It's called Learn and Participate. And the other one is about the legislature. There's more little nuggets buried under that tab. The other great resource is tvw.org, TV Washington. And that is where you can get all the live video feeds going on. And I'll show you various ways to access that. And then the third resource is what the coalition has put together on our own webpage, a page that we call the Policy Change Toolkit, where we're trying to pull together some of the most important links. So if you're ever thinking, oh, I know that we saw that, but I just can't find that information now on the legislature's website, our website might be a great place to go because we try to highlight them there. So let me jump over. I'll kind of go in reverse order, but here's the coalition's webpage, washingtonbreeze.org. And if you look under our policy tab, you can find that Policy Change Toolkit. And here we've got some information about how we educate and don't lobby. We've got links to some fantastic videos that Prevention Voices Washington made a couple sessions ago. They're still relevant. And we have links to 3 of those that are especially useful. And then we go into some information about the legislature and have links to some of that key information. And you can look under this little drop-down menu and find even more links. And many of these are things that I'm going to cover in today's training. You may want to have your own web browser open while we're doing this training, because we are going to be spending a lot of time on the legislature's website. So here's the legislature's homepage, totally redesigned. If you're someone like me that kind of had all the favorite spots memorized, you'll be relearning a little bit, but it's really pretty logical. And there's at least 2 ways to navigate. If you look kind of in the middle of the screen here where it's very prominent, find a bill or initiative, it's giving you a couple different tabs. Here you can find state laws. These are some of the most commonly searched for areas, so they put them right in the middle of that homepage in an easy to find place. But there's also the main navigation menu up at the top. And for example, under Learn and Participate, what I've learned is if you click on this drop-down caret, you actually get a sub-menu popping up. Hope you can see that smaller font. But for example, there's a link right here to how a bill becomes a law. Or there's a great link here to civic education programs, which is where you can find many educational materials on their website. And I'll refer to a few of these. For example, there is a list here of legislative documents in alphabetical order. That might sound really boring, but there's good stuff in there, folks. If I look under the A through L part, I know that there's a glossary of legislative terms. And this is one that is really helpful if you're wondering. Now, I know that's going to be too small to read, but you see how many terms it has. And this is a place where you can go if you're stumped by a name like X-File or a phrase like grandfather clause. And it explains what those are. And I can tell you right now that X-Files have nothing to do with aliens, and grandfather clauses have nothing to do with Santa Claus. So you can find what they actually refer to in this little glossary. And there's all these other guides in here, probably more than you have time for, but it's really good to know that they're there. We'll spend more time on this website today. And then TVW, I mean, when you flip through your cable channels, you may find TVW there, and you can watch live video that they're featuring, but you can also go look under their schedule and find all the upcoming sessions. And in fact, right now, this week, committees are meeting in Olympia for what's called Assembly Days. So there's a lot of work sessions going on, no bills being heard, but work sessions. And you could watch any of these live from TVW. And I'll also show you that videos are linked from bill pages so that it's easy to find the video of a hearing of a particular bill. So those are really important resources to know about. And you'll find that we're very lucky in this state that we have so much information on these websites. Okay, so let's get into what the legislature really does. So the legislature under the state constitution is required to meet in 2-year cycles. And we are just heading into the start of one of those cycles next month because they always start on the second Monday in January. These 2-year cycles are not, each year is not identical. The odd numbered years like 2025 are going to be a long session of 105 days. The even numbered years are a shorter session of 60 days. Now, when you think about it, neither one of those sessions is all that long. It's really only part of the year. There are some other states that have more full-time legislatures, but in Washington, you know, probably for historical reasons, maybe it was due to agricultural cycles in the early years of our state, the legislature only meets part of the year. And that means that the calendar is a big player in what gets done or doesn't get done. And we'll say more about that later. So now what I'm going to do is actually jump to a nice video that the legislature has put together. I'm going to use it a couple different times in this training because, you know, pictures sometimes are better than 1,000 words from a trainer. So I'm going to share the link to this video in the chat just so you have it. Please don't start playing it now because we don't want to hear your video too. But I'm going to jump over to that screen. And we'll play just a first bit of this video that will give a little bit of an overview of that 2-year cycle.
Welcome to Legislative Support Services Understanding the Legislative Process class. My name is Laura Love, and I'm the manager of the Legislative Information Center. A little throwback to high school civics. There are 3 branches of the government: legislative, executive, and judicial. The legislative branch writes the laws, the executive branch enforces the laws, and the judicial branch interprets the laws. This is an oversimplification of these branches as they do a lot more. The legislative branch is called the first among equals because it writes our state laws and authors our state constitution. The legislature works on a biennium. This is a 2-year cycle. It's important to know that bills not passed in the first year of the biennium are carried over to the second year. According to our state constitution, regular sessions begin the second Monday in January. The first year of regular session is a long session. Long sessions last 105 days, and this is when the legislature creates the biennial budget. The second year of a biennium is a short session. Short sessions last 60 days, and this is when the legislature creates supplemental budgets. The first year is always an odd-numbered year. The second year is an even-numbered year. We also have special session. Special sessions can be called by the governor, or the legislature can call themselves into a special session, with 2/3 majority vote in both chambers. Special sessions can last up to 30 days, and we can have multiple special sessions. There are 49 districts in Washington state.
Okay, I'll pause there and we're going to come back to that video when we're ready. So let's talk a little bit more about the 2025 legislative session. So not only will it be a new year, but there's going to be lots of new people and a really challenging budget situation. So a new governor has been elected, Bob Ferguson, And then there were elections this past year for all of the House seats, or this year in 2024, for all of the House seats and half of the Senate seats. Results of those elections mean that the Democrats are still in the majority for both chambers, and they actually added a seat in each house to that majority. There's going to be a lot of new legislators. About 1/4 of the legislature will be newly elected or appointed members. And that's a bit more than the normal turnover because there were a number of legislators leaving for various reasons. So right now, as I mentioned, the week of December 9th, the legislature has its assembly days where they're just talking about issues that they will be addressing in the next session. And then the session will begin on January 13th and end on January 27th. And we'll say more about what happens in between. We are also watching right now as the majority party in each chamber chooses the leadership of committees. And what we know is that in the healthcare or the healthcare related committees, there are going to be some new chairs. There's going to be new members. We don't know all the outcomes of those selections yet. They'll be decided, later in December, or certainly by the time the session has started in January. But the big news that is going to be the big topic is that revenues have been falling in our state. This is leaving a budget hole over the next 4 years that's substantial, $10 to $12 billion. And so there's talk about spending cuts. There's also talk from some legislators about new revenues. About 65% of the state budget is protected funding, like it's required under the Constitution for our schools, for example. That leaves just 35% of the state budget more vulnerable to cuts. And many public health and prevention programs, including the commercial tobacco program, are in that 35%. So those of us that care about those issues will be watching those budget numbers and seeing what the outcomes are. There also may be changes for federal funds that will be coming to Washington state. And that's unknown at this point, but it's certainly also on the radar screen of legislators. So who are these legislators? So the legislature does have 2 chambers. House of Representatives has 98 members. That's 2 from each of our 49 legislative districts. And the Senate has 49 members because there's just 1 senator per each district. And I will also say that the legislature is also all of the legislative staff. So each House member has 1 legislative aide, each senator has 2 legislative aides. Committees have legislative staff that work with them. Some of those folks are lawyers, so they're legislative counsels. There are more staff that work for the leadership in the House and the Senate, and also that work for the political caucuses in the House and the Senate. So I'm going to shift over again to that nice video and show you a little bit more about that to explain it. I'll back up just a skosh here. All right.
There are 49 districts in Washington state, equal in population. Every 10 years after the national census is done, the data is compiled and an independent redistricting commission redraws the districts to make sure they're still equal in population. Washington state has a bicameral legislature. This means we have 2 chambers. We have the Senate and the House of Representatives. Each district has 1 senator that serves a 4-year term and 2 representatives that serve 2-year terms. Election of members is done in even-numbered years. Every election cycle, half of the Senate seats and all of the representative seats are up for election. Chambers are the official halls for the meeting of a legislative body. Chambers are controlled by the caucus or political party in power. Caucuses are a group of legislators and staff who unite to promote an agreed-upon agenda, influence policy, and decide on questions of leadership. Typically, these take the form of political parties. You may have heard of Senate Democrats, Senate Republicans, House Democrats, and House Republicans, but there are many caucuses, and members from different caucuses can join to form a coalition. The majority caucus wields the most power. Due to the vast amount of bills that can be introduced in session, the House and Senate have legislative committees to help decide which bills will move forward in the process. There are policy committees, fiscal committees, and the Rules Committee, although the Rules Committee functions differently than the other standing committees. Our Constitution states that laws will be made by.
Okay, I'm going to pause there and jump back. So I was going to go next into really showing you some hands-on on how to find your legislators, and then also how to find information about committee members. But if anyone has a question, feel free to jump into chat or raise your hand right now. Okay, I'll move forward with finding this information on the legislative website. So this is a great time to figure out how to open up another browser so you can do this yourself in just a moment. But the legislature's website really makes it easy to do this. But I will share in the chat, there is a main page for finding legislators, and there are several ways to find them. And I'll flip over to that webpage in a minute, but there's a great tool called the Legislative District Finder, or district tool, and that lets you put in an address and look up the legislators that represent that area. You can put in a home address. You could put in a work address if you live and work in different places. One of my favorite, and there also is a nice lookup on the main tab where you can just enter a name or part of a name of a legislator and find them, or search for legislators by committee. And then when we get over to the page, I'll show you one of my favorite tools, which is this roster of members, which really gives you a great format of all sorts of information, including contact information about legislators. So an important caveat right now, though, is that we just had the elections earlier in November. So there's going to be changes, but those newly elected legislators, for the most part, have not yet been sworn in to their seat. That doesn't happen until the legislature starts that second week in January. A few exceptions to that was someone who's been appointed to a seat that was vacant for any reason. But for the most part, the legislature's website is still showing 2024 legislators, and it's not reflecting folks that won't be returning in the new year. So if we jump over to that page, so we can look under this main legislators tab, and you can see all the different ways that it gives you to find legislators. So let's go first to this look up your legislative district tab. And it gives you at least two ways to find it. Right up here, there's an address box. If you're on that page, why don't you go ahead and, you can listen to me talk and also enter your address and find your legislators. You can also use the map. You can zoom in on the map. You can move the map around. And I'm going to zoom in on the San Juan Islands district. And if I click on that San Juan Islands district, a little pop-up here, and I'm not sure if you can read that small type, but it tells me that's Legislative District 40. And the representatives are Deborah Lakhanoff and Alex Rammel, and the senator is Liz Lovelet. And then if I thought, well, okay, who's Deborah Lakhanoff? I can click through to her homepage. And so these are some of the things, once you find a legislator's name, you can click through to their homepage, and then you can start delving in and finding more information about them. Their homepage has lots of information, contact information. It tells you which committees they serve on. Now, remember, these are 2024 committees. Again, I don't think they've been updated yet. And this representative serves on other task force and committees. You can look up to see their voting record. You can look up to see their bill sponsorship page, which is delving in a little bit more into the details, but this really can tell you a lot about the types of issues that this legislator is interested in. What kinds of bills are they the lead sponsor on? What are their priorities? So there's all sorts of ways to look at information about legislators here. And a nice place to start too is to go to their actual web page. This is then taking you outside the legislature's website. This is a web page managed by the House Democrats. And this is where you find more personal information. So you can find the biography of this legislator. And you might know, for example, then what that person's background is. And in fact, this legislator lists the issues that are their top priorities, but says, you know, they care about many things, but these are their top priorities. So there's a wealth of information about who your legislators are and how to learn about them. And I think that's important because these are people, right? Our legislature is made up of people, and it's really important to think about it that way. It's not just some black box where bills go in and bills come out. There are people that deal with them at every step of the way. So going back to that legislators main page, here's another way to look up legislators by name or by committee. But I'm going to show you this roster of members that I find so useful. So the roster of members lets you look up all members of the House or Senate or all chambers. If I were to click on all, I'm going to get a readout like this that just has a lot of information for each legislator. It's their district, their phone number, their email, who their legislative assistant is, what their email is. And a little tip, it's always great to explore on a website. All of these little underlined headings here let you sort by that topic. So if I wanted to sort, I just sorted this by legislative districts. So now it's going District 1, District 2, District 3. If I sort by name, it's going to sort by last name. And then another nice feature of the member of rosters, if you had a reason for it, you can export this whole list to Excel and have that in an Excel format. Another thing I really like is it lists committee members by committee. It also will list members by districts and counties. So for example, if you work with an organization that works countywide and you want an easy way to find out, you know, well, for example, who are all the legislators that represent part or whole of Spokane County? You can see that Spokane list starting there, and P means they represent just part of Spokane County. And again, you can sort by this list and scroll down to Spokane. And there you've got a list of all the legislators that represent Spokane County. So let me jump back up to that main legislators tab. Okay, so how did you do with using the look up your legislative district? Anyone can give me a thumbs up if you found your legislators doing that. Okay, I'm seeing a couple thumbs up. Great. So this is a great tool. Okay, Isaac asked a really great question in the chat. I'm going to hold it until just a minute more when we get going on the bills. So the next thing I wanted to show you about is also finding legislators by committee and finding out who the key committees are. So there are a lot of committees in the legislature. It's fascinating to look at the list because it shows you the huge scope of issues they deal with. This slide lists the committees that are really the most key for public health and prevention issues. In the Senate, it may sound a little counterintuitive, but labor and commerce is really important for prevention issues because they deal with regulation of alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis products. Also health and long-term care, ways and means, which is the financial committee, and then rules. And we'll learn more about what those committees do in just a moment. Then in the House, regulated substances and gaming, healthcare and wellness. And in the House, they actually have two committees that deal with financial or budgetary issues. They have the fiscal committee, or sorry, the finance committee, and then the appropriations committee. So there is a main page on the legislative website about each committee. And it provides more information. If you go to that website, I can find it easily about under the legislature. I can find out about committees and go to the committees page. I can look up a committee or I can look at the whole list. So let's find that Senate Labor and Commerce. If I go to their webpage, right toward the top here, it lists the issues that they deal with. And right there at the bottom is regulation of liquor, tobacco, and cannabis. Obviously, they deal with many other issues too. And this is where you can find information about their upcoming meetings. They are having a meeting this Thursday. You can look at what the agenda is for the meeting. And at the time of the meeting, you can also find this view video link here and just click in and watch that meeting at 1:30 on Thursday. You can see a list of all the committee members and staff on this page. And these committee members are selected by their party caucus. So the majority party caucus will always have the majority on a committee, the majority of seats. And they select who the chair, who the vice chair is, and who the members are. And then the non-majority party will do the same, that they select members to be on this, and they always select a ranking member. And in this case, for Labor and Commerce, in the 2024 session, these were the leaders. So, and actually, Senator Saldana is the brand new chair of the Senate Labor and Commerce Committee. And then the ranking member on the Republican side will be Senator Curtis King. And as I mentioned, these changes in committee membership will probably be worked out by the end of December. So we're still seeing those come in. So I'm still holding on that question. We haven't gotten to bills yet, but we will get there soon. But I want to just pause here for a moment and go back to this slide. So on the committee's pages, there's some tips here about how to find information. And a key tip is that you can subscribe to email notifications about committee meetings. So you don't have to go and check the website every day to see who's meeting when. So where do you find those email notifications? And you may want to even sign up for those right now. So I believe it's from any page in the legislature's website. If you just keep scrolling all the way down to the footer, you'll see there's a link to email updates. If I click on that, I go to a different looking page that is the Gov delivery system. And I'm just going to type in my email address. And I believe it's the same whether you've been here before or whether you're doing this for the first time. But I type in my email address and I hit submit. And then you'll see a long list of committee and other legislative topics that you can subscribe to. And you'll see that I'm already subscribed to a number of these. So you can subscribe for fiscal information. You can pick which committees you'd like to get their agendas for and other notices. And you can change this throughout the session. Like, for example, right now, I'm not subscribed to the House Rules Committee. But if there was a bill I was watching that had gotten to that point in the process, then I go in and sign up for rules. And I choose not to be signed up to it all the time because you'll find you get a lot of emails each day with some of these committees. There's a lot going on. So you select what you want, and then you submit, and then it will even send you a little email saying what changes you've made. So I highly recommend that, and I'll show you in a couple minutes how you can sign up similarly to get alerts about bills. Okay, so I'm going to pause just for a moment there because I know there are folks in the room that have done this kind of work too. Did I miss any tips about finding information about legislators or committee members that you'd like to share with the group? Or this is also a great time for questions. Anybody? All right, I'm going to keep moving. So there's lots of information to cover. So we're going to move next into talking about bills. And this slide I'll cover really quickly, but I do just think it's useful to know, like, where do bills come from? And really, every bill starts with an idea. And that idea could come from a legislator. It could come from an organization, like a housing organization or a public health organization. It could just come from a constituent who contacts their legislature and says, hey, I think this is a problem. Can you address it? Sometimes legislators also do get ideas from watching laws being passed in other states. So it's usually a process that has a cycle of policy development where that idea or concept gets turned into an outline or maybe even into some legislative language. At some point, a legislator needs to be identified who's going to be the prime sponsor. And then they're going to submit the language to get turned into what's called a code reviser draft. The code reviser are other legislative staff, and they make sure that a bill is written to match all the legal requirements. When they're doing that, they're also checking that nothing in the bill would do something that's unconstitutional or in conflict with other laws. And then they give you back a draft. And that draft is what's used to get an initial list of co-sponsors. And then once the prime sponsor is happy with that initial list of co-sponsors, they put it into a box. They literally still take a paper copy and they put it into a wooden box called the hopper that you can find down on the Capitol in Olympia. And that process has already started with pre-filed bills starting in December. And then bills can be filed throughout the session too. So this slide really quickly overviews how a bill becomes a law. And it's really a long path to become a law. And at any one of these little steps on here, it could be blocked for various reasons, including just the clock. So there are many ways for a bill to die and a lot fewer ways for it to actually pass. And there is a written overview of how a bill becomes a law, and I've just put that link in the chat. But bills can start in either chamber. Sometimes they get introduced in both chambers. And if if a bill is introduced in the House and the Senate and they're absolutely identical word for word, then those are labeled companion bills. They can change as they each work through the process, but they start out the same. So bills will then get referred by leadership to a policy committee. And that goes back to Isaac's good question in the chat of, is there a quick way to determine which committees will be assigned certain bills? Well, sometimes it's really logical. So, for example, we know that the budget bills won't go to a policy committee first. They'll always go to the fiscal committee first. So they'll go straight to a fiscal committee like Ways and Means or Appropriations. If a bill is really clearly about the healthcare system, you can trust it's probably going to go to the committee that deals with the healthcare system. The harder one to figure out is when a bill might cover several issues. Those decisions get made by leadership. And like a lot of other things in the process, sometimes they're not easy to predict. And sometimes leadership are making decisions based on where they think the bill would be addressed the best. And that can get into a little bit of politics. So bills go to policy committees. If they get a majority vote, they are passed out. And then if they have a fiscal impact, they go to the fiscal committee. If they don't have a fiscal impact, they can go straight to rules. And if a bill does have to go to the fiscal committee, it also needs to get a hearing and a vote in that committee and get a majority vote, and then to move on to rules. Rules is a really different committee. It's the only one that does not have hearings. It's really a process where the leaders of that rules committee, who are also some of the leaders of each chamber, are figuring out which bills they want to bring out to a floor vote. And a floor vote means that it's all the members of the House or all the members of the Senate are voting on a bill. Once a bill passes a floor vote with a majority vote, most bills only require a majority vote. It's not done yet. It starts the whole process over in the second chamber. So a House bill goes over to the Senate and works through all these committees and a floor vote, or a Senate bill goes to the House and works through all these committees and vote. If a bill does pass both chambers, that's a huge milestone, but then the governor still needs to sign it for it to become a law. So I've added, once a bill passes a chamber, let me add a couple more steps that can happen. So what if a House bill worked all the way through the House, was passed by the House, maybe it was changed along the way, then the bill goes over to the Senate and the Senate changes it again, and then the Senate passes it. Well, so the bill has passed both chambers, but this was a House bill and the Senate changed it. So then what has to happen is that the House has to either agree or disagree with those changes. And this is what's called this concurrence, dispute, or conference committee process. If they concur, the House is saying, okay, we can live with the Senate's changes. If they dispute them, they send the bill back to the Senate and say, nope, we don't like what you did to our bill. We don't accept it. The Senate can then say, all right, well, we're done. We don't like it then. Or both chambers could agree to a conference committee where they appoint a few legislators, a small group, to sit down, hash it out, and figure out how they can make a version of the bill work for both chambers. That then has to pass at a floor vote of each chamber, and those concurrence votes are, or conference committee votes, are just up or down. There's no more messing with the language at that point. So let's say a bill had to go through this process. Maybe it got out of a conference committee, it got a vote in both chambers, then it goes to the governor. So whenever the governor gets a bill, the governor can sign it, the governor can veto all of it, or the governor can veto just a section of it. In budget bills, the governor can veto just a line item of it. So you can see how this is a really long process and lots of ways for things to go awry. Then here's what is often the big challenge, is that this is all done with a ticking clock. So this is the tentative calendar for the 2025 session. And these calendars are passed by legislative resolutions in each chamber at the beginning of every session. And the tentative calendar is already up on the website. And unofficially, these are called the cutoff calendars because things get cut off if they don't get past these deadlines. So we'll start on January 13th, and there will seem to be a relatively long time before the first cutoff for bills to get out of the policy committee they were assigned to. After that, boy, things started going a lot faster. In just 7 days, there's a fiscal committee cutoff. So if a bill you're tracking only passed out of the policy committee on that very last day, in just 7 days, it needs to get a hearing and a vote before that fiscal committee cutoff. So you can imagine that a lot of bills pile up at that point, and committees don't always have time to get to them. Many a good bill has died just because there wasn't time to get to it, even though it had a lot of support. Then we go on to, after the fiscal committee, they'll start voting on bills on the floor. That can happen at any time, really. And bills must be out of their house of origin by March 12th. And that's what's called the crossover cutoff, probably unofficially, but it means that any bill that got past that deadline goes over to the opposite house. It starts that process all over again. And then by April 16th, bills that came over from the other chamber have to have passed the opposite chamber or they're dead. So really all the policy related bills will be completely finished up this year by April 16th. The exceptions are bills that are budget bills or fiscal bills, and all of those are called NTIB, necessary to implement the budget. And they don't have to meet these cutoffs. They can jump into the process and be worked on at different points. They can take longer. The last few weeks of the session is really just spent on budget. All they can vote on at that point are budget bills, revenue bills, or initiatives that were submitted by the people. So now let's jump into tracking a bill, and I'll get to more of the answers to questions that are going by in track in the chat. So tracking a bill, you're going to be wanting to go to the bill pages, and I've put a number of tips on these slides. I will be sharing the slides, and a key thing to do is we'll go and look at a bill, and then we'll see how to sign up for notifications for it. So I'm going to jump over to the legislature's website. I'm going to go back to the home page, so we start there. And you can look for a bill if you already know the number right from the home page, but I'm going to click on the bills, meetings and session tab, and then I'm going to actually go to the bills page because it has the most information about different ways to find a bill. And I won't talk about all of them today due to time. But you can definitely find a bill by the bill number. But hey, I don't know what the bill numbers are yet. So there are other ways to search. You can also search, you can search by bills that are being introduced, and by topic, and by which bills are introduced into the House. So now someone said, how do you find the list of bills that have already been pre-filed? And I think someone shared a great answer to that. But you can click on that pre-filed bills list, and here is all the list of bills that have been filed so far. Again, this is a sortable list. So if I wanted to search by sponsor, I can. Like if I've heard that a certain legislator is going to introduce a public health bill I want to track, you can search by sponsor. I generally search by date because I'm watching this list each day. And so I know that I looked at all the bills that were introduced up to a certain day. And all I need to read is the ones that have been introduced most recently. So what you find here is the bill number, and you also find the bill title and who the sponsor is. And then I'm going to show you a bill as just an example. So Senate Bill 5001 has been pre-filed, and it is a bill to once again try to say that Washington State would like to stay on Pacific Standard Time all year long and not change our clocks twice a year. You may or may not agree with that, but that's what the bill does. And right here on the top of the bill information, it lists the sponsors, and there's actually links to information about them there. So I can actually go and find other bills that are sponsored by this legislator, and then I can also look up who that legislator is, Senator Wilson. And all of the sponsors are listed on here. And there was a question in the chat of who the author of a bill is. You know, really knowing, I mean, the author of the bill for official purposes is the prime sponsor, in this case, Senator Wilson. You can see that it's co-sponsored by Senator Dhingra. So Senator Dhingra probably already had some say in it as well. But knowing who actually wrote the bill, that's a good question. And you'd really have to go talk with that legislator to find out if they really came up with the idea themselves, or did they get assistance from an organization. In terms of who drafts the actual bill language, Legislative Council always has a hand in that. So it's usually the legislative staff for the committee that it gets assigned to. And so this one, you can't see really any bill history because it hasn't been assigned anywhere yet. But you can see the bill language. So what I want to point out here is that you can get email notifications about this bill. So see these little boxes to the side of the bill tracking. The first one is to send a comment on this bill to your legislators. So caution there, that is a lobbying action if you're sending any kind of suggestion that they should vote yes or no on this. Look at the next box, which is get email notifications. So all you have to do is write in your email address, and you will get emails sent to your inbox every time there is a legislative action on that bill. So I've now signed up for tracking the Pacific Standard Time bill. There are many other ways to track bills, and I'm going to go back to that bills page. I don't have time to walk through it today, but on this main bills page, there is a tool called Selective Bill Tracking. It's actually going to take me into a login. I'd hoped I could walk through it with you, but I think the clock is getting ahead of me. But there is a really nice little tutorial or list on this webpage about how to track a bill using a bill tracker tool that the legislature provides, where let's say there are 10 different bills you want to follow. It basically lets you set up a simple account and you can list those bill topics in that account. And then anytime I want to see that tracking, I know I just go to that one place. I don't have to remember all the numbers. They're all there. I will tell you that it doesn't let you do a whole lot else. So what many people do to track bills is they create their own spreadsheet. And I've listed that here on your tips, is like, create your own Excel file where you list the bills you're tracking, where they're at in the process. And you can also list in any notes that you want to on issues that you're watching with the bill. So I want to jump next to reading the bill history. So this is also on the page. And the bill I'm using as an example is one that many of us watched last year. It's HB 2182 in the 2024 session. So if you want to find that in the lookup, you can follow along on this. I'm just going to look at a static slide, but 2182 actually worked all the way through the House. And so what you see in the bill history is it tells you the date and every action that was taken on the bill. So you can see when it had a hearing and which committee it is. You can see when it was referred to rules, when it got sent to a floor vote. And in fact, this bill did pass the House. It passed unanimously. Then it went over to the Senate and it was referred to the Senate Labor and Commerce Committee, but it never got assigned a hearing time there. So it died for the session. So it's just another example of how a bill that had a lot of support in the House still ran into some type of barrier in the Senate. So tracking a bill is the first part of just knowing where it is, but really understanding a bill is the key part. And again, the legislature's website makes that really easy by providing a list of documents. And I've got some tips on this slide, and just the cliff notes on the tips are that some bills do have an intent section at the top that says what it's trying to do. It's then up to the reader to decide whether the bill really does what it's trying to do. And that's often part of the debate as a bill goes through the legislature. The definition section can seem boring, and I know a lot of people skip right over it. But the definition section is where key terms in the bills are defined. And sometimes what you find is that the definition will state, for example, for vapor products, it will define what a vapor product is, and it will state what's included in that definition and what's not included in that definition. So you can see how that's really important to understand because it defines the scope of the bill. And then sometimes to fully understand a bill, you need to look at the underlying law that it can be amending, because bills will either be putting in new language or they will be modifying existing language. I'd want to just look at that kind of example of simple bills that just add new sections to the law, and then more complicated bills. So a simple bill example is the one that I just mentioned of the 2182 that was a bill last year on the LCB data dashboard. That bill really just added only new text. So if I go and look it up, and I'm going to put in the number 2182, but then I have to remember to pick the right biennium of 2023, 2024, or else it will probably tell me bill not found. But if I go and look at that bill and I'm on the bill webpage, I can scroll down and I can see the language of, I'll look at just the original bill, but the language of the original bill, this is just a 3-page bill or 2.5-page bill. And at the top, it says it will, in this little paragraph, it will add a new section to chapter 66.08 RCW. RCW is Revised Code of Washington. And then you can see that just before section 1, it says new section. That is your clue that that is all new language. So you can just read through, and that is the new language that will get added to the bill or to the law if it passes. Then that's different from a bill like the 5001, the Pacific Standard Time bill. If I go under documents and look at that bill, it says a bit more at the top here. It says that it would amend 2 RCWs. It would amend some uncodified language, and then it would create a new section, and then it would repeal an RCW. So it's got a lot more going on. So again, you can see that section 1 is a new section, all new language. Section 2 states RCW 1.20.05 is amended to read as follows. And then this is where your clue is that any underlined text is new language. And any strike through text, like in this 3rd section, is language that's deleted. So to understand the impact of a bill, you have to look at that context of what it's adding and what it's taking away. Now, this is a bit of an art, and you get better at it as you do it. Nobody is great at reading and fully understanding a bill when they first do it. It's one of those nice little learned skills. There is a little handout the legislature has called Guide to Reading a Legislative Measure, and that is a useful tip. It basically will, it sort of outlines these different components of a bill and how to understand it. And what are some of the common language that you will find in a bill. And I'll point out one thing toward the end, you often see a section like this one, section 8, that states when the bill takes effect. And this one would take effect November 3rd, 2025. All right, let me jump back to other ways to look at bills. So on any bill's document page, once it starts working through the process and starts having committee hearings, you will start seeing these things called bill reports. They say things like House Bill Analysis, House Bill Report, Substitute House Bill Report. If this bill had worked through the Senate, you would have start seeing on the list Senate Bill Report, Senate Substitute Bill Report. So those are really useful to orient yourself to a bill. And in fact, you might even want to start with one of those. So there aren't any bill reports yet for any of these new bills. So I'm going back to the bill from 2024, but I can look at the substitute Senate bill report. So this was created when the bill moved into the Senate. And all of these bill reports will have, describe the bill at the top, and then it will have a brief summary of the bill, usually no more than half a page, that says what the bill does. These are written by committee staff, and committee staff do an amazing job with these, but I'll also say they're trying to summarize things, so they're not going to catch every detail. So if you, for whatever reason, need to see every detail about a bill and really understand all of its implications, you're going to need to read the bill. But these summaries are awesome for just going, oh yeah, okay, I see what it's getting at. I do want to watch this bill. The bill report also gives you some background. That's super helpful. Basically, the staff have researched this and put together some of the context you need to understand the bill. They summarize the bill. Often they'll summarize changes made to the bill. Then let me jump back over to the House report. It wasn't the Senate report. If I look at the House report and I scroll toward the end of it, it will also tell me who testified in support or in opposition to the bill. It's usually at the bottom, right after the staff do a little summary of public testimony. Again, the summary is just a summary, so it's not going to capture everything a speaker says that they like or dislike about the bill, but it will also list who is supporting it, and you can see groups that are supporting it or not supporting it. And that's really helpful sometimes for understanding, I guess you could call it the politics of the bill. You could help you understand whether there's support for the bill or opposition. So the other thing that the bill pages give you a lot of information about is when the bill gets its hearing, and then legislators will start making changes to the bill. And those you can all find through the bill pages too. You can sign up for those notifications on a bill, and you can sign up for committee agendas and hearings, as we talked about earlier. And you can see as the bill moves through the system, you can watch the hearings live on TVW. And then from the bottom of every bill page, pretty quickly, that recording of the video will be linked. So you don't have to remember, oh yeah, this bill got a hearing last Wednesday in this committee. You can just go to the bill page, go to the bottom, and find the video links. So what I want to talk about more, though, is what happens when a committee starts making changes to a bill. And any type of change is called an amendment, but then there are also things that, there are also other terminology that's used. I've got it summarized on this slide. So an amendment is a change to just one part of the bill. Can even just be just one sentence or maybe just one section. Committees can also do what's called a substitute, which is an entire replacement bill. And they do that pretty often when they're making changes in multiple parts of the bill. So rather than having a whole bunch of different amendments, they just roll those into a substitute bill that would replace the original. So changes can occur in the committees. Changes can also occur during the floor votes of either chamber. And that terminology is just different, slightly different. We call them floor amendments. And if on the floor they would propose a totally new bill, then it's called a striker instead of a substitute. So let's go to a bill page again and see where we can find those documents. So I'm going to use 2182 again as my example because it's gone through hearings last year, and it has examples of these documents. So from the bill history, I can see that this bill had a public hearing in the House Committee on Regulated Substances and Gaming, and then it had an executive session, a vote. Executive sessions are when they vote, and that occurred on the 29th. And in small font here, there are the words committee materials here in green. This is a live link, and this is super important because if I was watching the progress of this bill and wanted to know if this committee is going to change this bill, I would click on those committee materials. So it's jumped me over to that page for that particular hearing on January 29th of this year. Here were all the bills they heard, and these are little folders. If I open up the 2182 folder, there's a folder that has a shorthand name of amends and proposed subs. That's where amendments and substitutes live. So in fact, there was an amendment to the bill in the committee, and this was voted on, and it says adopted. Other things that amendments could say is withdrawn, or it could say not adopted. So then you can look at what the amendment was. You can bring up this text. And at the bottom of every amendment or substitute, there is something called an effect statement. And that is written by staff, but it's the shorthand summary of what the amendment does. So I do go and look there first because it's going to give me the quick take on what was this amendment trying to accomplish. And then I can go back and look at more details of the actual changes in words that occurred in the amendment. So that committee documents page is really important to look at. and it's often overlooked. So for any changes going on in hearings, that the committee materials and committee documents is where you find those amendments. Now, on every bill page, there is a place that's called amendments. Do you see that caption down there that says amendments? So right now it says no amendments. Well, I just showed you that there was an amendment to this bill that was adopted in committee. So here's the little tip. The amendments portion of the bill page is only for floor amendments. This is where a floor amendment would show up. And the committee amendments are things that committees change and they aren't fully adopted until they're adopted through a vote of the floor. And I will say that when you're looking at a lot of changes to a bill, you might hope that there's a really simple way to understand what all the changes are. But for example, if you have an original bill and then the committee creates a substitute, sometimes what you have to do to understand them is compare the two bills line by line and just look through and see all the text that's still there and any text that was changed or removed. And that is the way you can do it. Okay, last little note I'll say on understanding bills is fiscal notes. Whole nother area, and I'll be the first to say that fiscal notes sometimes are the hardest part to understand about bills. But a fiscal note just simply estimates the financial impacts of a bill or a bill amendment. And those impacts can be to the state. Fiscal notes can also record impacts to local governments. Most bills have some fiscal impact, but not all. And the fiscal impact statements get written by state agency staff, by OFM staff, by DOR staff, the financial management and revenue staff. And one challenge with fiscal notes is there's a lot of bills introduced. And as I've been mentioning, not every bill gets a hearing. So generally the fiscal note is not requested and the agencies don't start working on that fiscal note until it's clear that the bill is getting scheduled for a hearing. So it's very common that a hearing on a bill occurs before the fiscal note is completed and available. Sometimes, less common, but sometimes a committee is even voting on a bill before the fiscal note is finished. If you're on the email notifications for a bill, you'll hear when that fiscal note comes out. And then you find those fiscal notes from bill pages. So here I am back on the 2182 page again. And under fiscal note, you see it says get fiscal note. I'm going to click on that. And this also shows you the process. These are in reverse chronological order. There were actually 6 fiscal notes written for this bill. There was one written for the original bill in January, and then as the bill changed and went through the process, or maybe the fiscal note got revised and finalized, different versions came up. So generally, you're going to want to look at the most current version. So here, this was the last version, and this little document icon is you click on it, and then you get a multi-page document that is going to have a summary at the top of any expenditures that agencies are going to have to make for the bill. And also, if there were revenues, there would also be listing of any revenues. And you can see cash receipts. There's nothing, this bill would not have brought any money into the state. It would have cost some money for the agencies to administer the program. What I find really helpful with understanding fiscal notes is to keep scrolling and read the narratives that different agencies write. And in this bill, I know that LCB was the main agency, so I'm going to keep scrolling until I can find their, here's the Liquor and Cannabis Board section of the fiscal note where they list some costs. And then there actually are words that sometimes are easier to understand than the little forms that explain some of the considerations they have as to what the bill made them do. and they describe some of the assumptions that they made in estimating the costs. And for example, not uncommon for a state agency to do what LCB had to do here of say, in fact, we don't know the complexity of some of this work, so we're not really sure what it would cost us to do or how it could be accomplished. So they try to explain the best estimate of what they're doing, but they can't always do that. Fiscal notes are something that for a complicated bill, I ponder on the most. And this is also where, finding friends that you can talk with about a fiscal note can be really valuable because you can compare notes on your different takes on it and together piece together the whole story. So that is the end of my tips on bills. That went really quick. I will pause there again to just see, are there questions or do people have other tips on how to track bills or understand bills? Alrighty. Well, I'm still running a little bit over, but I do just have just a couple more slides. So budget bills are bills just like any other bill, but it's kind of a different process as you track the budget process. And so this slide gives you a little bit of information in that there are 3 different budgets the legislature works on. The operating budget, which this pie chart shows takes up most of the state's funds, the transportation budget, and then the capital budget. And I really recommend, there's a little guide. This is a current version of this guide to the Washington State budget process. And I'm putting that link in the chat and we'll also share it out with the slides, but that has a nice little overview. You can track the budget bills once they're introduced. They get a number just like any other bill. And if you want to see an example of a budget bill, I'm going to put in the chat the bill number for the supplemental operating budget of 2024. So this is already finished and passed, and it was number 5950. However, just be aware that the first version of the budget bill that gets introduced, you can kind of think of it like a placeholder. And it isn't until much later in the session that the budget writers are going to release the actual budget and really start working on that budget document. So note the bill number, but the place to actually watch current budget proposals is on a separate website called fiscal.wa.gov. And they have a lot of information about bills there. So let me jump over to find that page too. So this is your center of information, fiscal.wa.gov for budget proposals. And you can see prominently at the top is latest budget proposals. And you can click on any in this list. And I will tell you, these are all 2024 yet. I'll have a slide next that shows you the process for the upcoming budget, but these are all past things. But you can look up any particular bill and budget bill. And so this one will tell me, here's this supplemental operating budget 5950 that we watched last year. And here's all the different documents that came with it. Also really helpful on fiscal.wa.gov is see how there's this prominent place, new to state budgets. Again, they're being very helpful and providing you with some tutorials and things, some overviews of the budget process, some links to other things, and I've given you one of those links. And then once it comes to, if you're looking for funding for a particular program, and that is what many of us are doing when we watch this, I'm going to pull up the operating budget bill from last year, supplemental operating budget bill and show you the way that I find funding about the state's commercial tobacco program. And this may seem old school, and if anyone has a better way, you can sure tell me. But this is the PDF that I could pull up. This is actually the law as it was passed. And I use the search function on my browser window to find keywords. So I put in the word tobacco. And I actually find that the word tobacco is used 19 times in this document. So that's actually not bad for an 899 page document. I'm only going to have to look at 19 entries to hopefully find the one that is going to tell me what I need to know. And you'll find that that word tobacco is used in a lot of places that is not the thing I'm looking for. But I can go through and see all the places where this budget bill refers to tobacco. For example, here it referred to tobacco master settlement agreement options. And there's some bookkeeping going on about how much money gets transferred from that master settlement agreement to different pots for the state. But I'm going to keep looking down. And I already know what I'm looking for, but I'm going to find the amount that is appropriated to the Department of Health for their work on commercial tobacco prevention and cessation. And I finally found it here on page 471 of the document. And in this year's supplemental budget, there was actually an amendment, a change to the amount. So originally it was supposed to be $2.5 million for fiscal year 2025, but the legislature bumped that up to $3 million. So you can see that $2.5 million was struck out and $3 million was written in. And that is literally how I find that critical change that meant that in the 2024 session, the legislature gave a bit more funding to the program. I'm going to jump back to my slides and just overview how does a budget get created and when. So really the budget work for this session started during the summer for the state agencies, where they decided what to ask the governor to put into their budget. And the Governor Inslee gave some guidance to his agencies this year. He said it's going to be a tough budget year, so don't put in new spending, essentially. There's a process where those agency requests go through the Office of Financial Management that does work on them. They all go up to the governor. And then by law, it's required that in December, the governor releases a 2-year budget proposal. And this one, oops, and I think I've got the words wrong on that slide. This one will be for 2026 through 2027. That is the one that will be coming out for the next biennium. And so you will see Governor Inslee put out a budget this December, even though Governor Inslee's term will end as soon as Governor-elect Ferguson is inaugurated in January. So Governor Inslee will put out a budget, and then we also expect that Governor Ferguson will put out a budget once he's in office. So this will be an interesting year because of that. But those governor's budgets are sent to the legislature, but the legislature is also going to write its own budget. So they're probably working on it already, but the budget writing really gets serious by leadership teams in each chamber in January to mid-March. And during this time, the legislature is they're working on all the policy bills, but those budget writers are meeting regularly and working on budget proposals. Around late March, just after there's a spring revenue forecast, the chair of the House Budget Committee, the House Appropriations Committee, and the chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, they will each put out budgets. So will the chairs of the transportation committees. So that is when you actually see what each chamber is planning to do, and it may be very different than what the governor was suggesting be done. Those bills are going to work through each chamber. They're not going to be the same. They're never the same. The House and Senate always come in with different numbers, even if for the same program. Maybe one budget funds some programs that the others doesn't. And at some point, they're going to have to resolve it, and so that the legislature passes one final budget. And that is what goes to the governor's desk, and the governor can then sign it, or very often they will veto parts of it. And that doesn't happen until April. So you can see it's a long process. And the other thing about this process is there's a lot that goes on behind closed doors. It's not until in March sometime, late March really, and into April, that we can start seeing these budget documents and that hearings are held on the budget documents. So the next slide that I won't work through all the way, it also just shows what happened this last year. And almost always happens is that while both chambers work on their separate budget bills, which are not the same, at some point it becomes clear like which budget is going to be the final vehicle, as I call it, the final version that the two chambers are going to have to agree on. And for the past several years, it's often been the Senate budget. It doesn't have to be, it could be the House budget, but the Senate budget was the one that they decided, okay, the Senate worked on it. They worked on it on the floor. They passed a version. They sent it to the House. The House had their version sitting there. The House then made changes to the Senate bill to make it look more like what the House wanted. And then there was this kind of reconciliation where House and Senate budget leaders sit together and sort out the differences so that all the numbers align. And they develop what's called a conference report. And then that conference report is voted on by each chambers. And at that vote, it is yes or no. There's no more amendments allowed. So you do often see votes like the one you see below where, you know, there may be partisan divides between support for the budget, but you might see, most members of a chamber supporting a budget. Does it mean that that legislator likes every detail of the budget? No, it doesn't. But at this point, yes or no are the only two options that they have. And then that bill is what went to the governor's desk. So budget process is probably the most complicated to follow. It's also one where it's really helpful to get some inside information from groups that are participating in this process more closely. And in our policy change learning circles, that's part of what we try to do is bring together people who have different views of the process, and we all compare notes, and that helps us understand what's going on. So I'll pause there and see any other tips on following or understanding budgets. Or questions. And thanks for hanging with me here. I see some tips that, yeah, just track one or two bills. Yes, if you're tracking a lot of bills, it can get really challenging. For those of you in the prevention field, I mean, there often are a lot of cannabis related bills each session. That seems to have been the trend for many years. So the folks doing that tracking often have a lot of work cut out for them. On some other topics, you might be tracking 2 or 3 or 4 bills, or maybe just one. Okay. I am going to go ahead and stop the recording now.